Welcome back to the latest edition of Until Saturday. I'm Ari Wasserman, joined by my co-host David Ubben, who has been on vacation for the past 2 years. I don't know where you've been, but it's good to see your face again, David. Welcome back to the show. We have a pretty big show here because we have Dane Brugler. Can I call you the czar of the NFL draft? Is that a good way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been called quite worse than that, so that works.
There's a lot to talk about, both in the NFL draft world, players who are leaving the teams to enter the NFL draft and move on to the next level, but also college football changes and maybe how we can evaluate high school players and college players similarly to the way that they are as they're heading into the draft. The SEC and the Big Ten have an advisory group. What could that mean for college football and the movement of the sport in general? And Dr. Pepper Fansville theory from a fan here that I found quite funny, along with other mailbag questions. So we have a pretty loaded show. Be sure to follow the podcast on Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please help support the show by leaving a 5-star review. If you leave a question with that review, we will do our best to answer it on the show. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Both the links to the YouTube and the podcast can be found in the show's description, and leave us a voicemail for future Until Saturday episodes on our phone line at 316-462-9852. You can text that line, but please leave a voicemail. They're really fun, and we love to hear your voice. So why don't we get into the show, guys? Dane, how is your life right now?
I'm doing great. It's good to be home. I was on the road the last 2 weeks, first in Frisco for the Shrine Bowl, and then Mobile for the Senior Bowl. So 2 of the most productive trips of the year for me. And I got to admit, though, I love this week. It's Super Bowl week, so all of the attention is on the hoopla out there in Vegas. And I've got a week to just kind of catch up, get my breath before everyone shifts back to draft talk starting next week. But, this is We're getting right into it. It's becoming real now. But you know what? I've been waiting months and months for everybody to talk draft with me. So I'm just glad it's here.
Dan, I'm going to call you every day.
Before we get into the show, sorry, let me just make sure I say that he is the Athletics NFL draft guru. He creates this large document called The Beast, which is probably the most popular content item that we have every year on The Athletic, and it's like 9,000 pages of pure draft information. So if you're a draft nerd, or it's very thorough, but more importantly, it's very good, like Dave said. Be sure to check that out. And also be sure to check him out on the Athletic Football Show feed moving forward. The NFL season will be coming to an end on Sunday night, and then it turns into his Super Bowl. So, Dave, sorry for cutting you off. Why don't you get to your question?
No, I was going to say I was planning on calling Dane every day moving forward, asking when the Beast was going to be ready. Dane, we get the Beast. Let's get the Beast going. Going.
Honestly, there's a late March, early April. There's a day I wake up, I'm just like, all right, I can't do anymore. This is it. Let's cut it off. Because look, there's always gonna be another player to watch. There's always gonna be another tape to watch, and at some point, you just got to cut it off and say, all right, enough's enough. 400 players, all these words and pages, whatever. It's time to release it into the wild. So we're not quite there yet, but I'm getting anxiety thinking of counting down the days until we're there.
Dane, there's a lot of NFL draft experts out there. You see mock drafts all the time and stuff. But why don't you give our listeners a key into what your year is like in terms of, and if you're unfamiliar with the Beast, you've been living under the rock, but the Beast is one of the best tools for the NFL draft, and it looks like it takes a full year to compile all the information, a lot of reporting, a lot of analysis, a lot of watching tape. What does your year look year round, and how do you put this thing together every spring?
Well, first of all, thank you for not snickering when you said the word expert. I really enjoy this process because it is a process. It literally takes years to put these things together because I'll be watching film on a player on an offensive tackle, and then this pass rusher starts flashing. It's like, oh, who's this guy? Oh, he's a freshman. Okay, I better write his name down for 2 years from now when I need to make sure that I'm doing more work on him. So I watch a lot of college football. I mean, it's really all I do is watch the film and work the phones. That's basically the bulk of my time. I will get on the road here and there, not as much as I used to, just because I have the film right in front of me, and I get it's a lot more efficient doing it that way. But in earnest, it starts in the summer. That's where you get the base, the foundation for all these seniors and for a lot of these high-profile juniors, underclassmen. And then you go through the season, you start updating those reports and those grades, and then it becomes January 1st, and that's when we get into All-Star season, which we just finished up. And now it gets into getting ready for the Combine, getting the verified measurements, and all these steps during the draft process, the All-Star games, the Combine, the workouts. They're cross-checking exercises. You don't automatically change your grade on a player just because somebody ran fast in the 40-yard dash or because he looked good during Senior Bowl practices. It's a cross-checking exercise. So if you see something during one of these steps of the process, okay, you go back to the tape and figure out, okay, what did I miss? Is this guy actually a better athlete than I thought? Seeing him, being on the field 5 feet away from these guys at the Senior Bowl, it just gives you a better sense for how they move, what type of athlete they are, what type of body type do they have, just all the different biomechanics of who they are as an athlete, but then also the technical side and just their play strength, things like that. So there's all these necessary steps to the final product that hopefully creates a better picture for who these guys are. The background information is really important. So, I'm talking to parents, high school coaches, siblings, a lot of people to gather all this information because, again, there's all these puzzle pieces. They're all over, and the more puzzle pieces that you gather helps put together a more clear picture for who these guys are as football players and as people and who they'll eventually be as NFL guys.
Yeah, coming off of Mobile, Dane, who jumped out to you and why do you hate everybody else's teams?
There were definitely some quote unquote winners or, guys that stood out. Darius Robinson from Missouri came in. I mean, he was in my mid-January 2-round mock. Darius Robinson was a second-round pick and, a player that was easy to like on film because he looks the part. He's long, 6'5", 290 pounds, moves well, but he also showed better technique and better understanding how to break down blockers and get to the quarterback. And we saw that throughout the week of practice. He was one of the best players down there in Mobile, maybe worked himself into that top 40, top 30 conversation. Quinyon Mitchell from day one was a big-time player, the corner from Toledo. He has a chance to be a top 20 pick. A couple tackles. This is a very tackle-rich draft in the first round at the top. Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, Talise Fuaga from Oregon State. Both those guys are kind of jockeying for position in terms of who are going to be the first 5 or 6 tackles drafted. Tavondre Sweat, all 360 some odd pounds of him. He did not step on the scale at the Senior Bowl, which tells me maybe he's a little bit heavier than he wants to be and trying to get down those pounds before the Combine. But nonetheless, good luck stopping him when he comes rolling at you with all that power behind his pads. So, but you know what? People want to talk about the quarterbacks, right? That's where a lot of the conversation shifts, and everyone overreacts to the quarterbacks. I mean, not too long ago, I remember reading Malik Willis and Carson Strong first-round tweets from the Senior Bowl, and then just looking around, thinking like, guys, this is not how this works. But because of that inevitable hype, I expected Bo Nix and Michael Penix to really shine and for the hype machine to get out of control at the Senior Bowl. But really, they had very up and down weeks. And I usually ignore the quarterbacks the first practice, give them a day to settle in, new receivers, new environment. But then by practice 2 and 3, I'm looking for improved timing, placement, and overall it was just a mixed bag from both Nix and Penix. And so, and that's not to say they hurt themselves at all, but I don't think they helped themselves necessarily. And both these guys have 5, 6. Nix has 5 years, Penix has 6 years of tape where we've seen enough on these guys to know what they are. But really, the entire quarterback position as a whole. I do a wrap-up article where I pick one winner from each position. And for the quarterbacks, I went with Spencer Rattler from South Carolina because he was just the most consistent. But, it'll be interesting as we debate Nix and Penix throughout the process. I've got plenty of teams or plenty of people in the league who are steadfast that Nix is going top 20. And part of that are the quarterback needy teams that are picking in the teens. But it'll be really interesting to see how these quarterbacks separate themselves or maybe don't separate themselves the rest of the process.
Dane, I think that the process of evaluating and drafting a quarterback is one of the most interesting things in all of sports, because at times, just as a college football reporter, and I think Dave probably shares this, notion a little bit, is that the process, which is, what you're just talking about, Senior Bowl, combine, off-season weight routines, all this stuff sometimes takes precedent or seems to take precedent over tape.
Mm-hmm.
And then at times there's players that get drafted. There have been a few times in my career where a player gets drafted really, really high, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And that player doesn't turn out to be very good. And it's like, I don't know what I'm even looking at. How am I supposed to know this? And then all these people who are making all these decisions and paid a ton of money to evaluate them don't see what everybody who watched the game saw. And the question I have for you, especially at the quarterback position, is that it seems like such a random bag in the NFL of who turned out to hit and who didn't, as we're, gearing up for a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy starting in it. Like we don't really seem to know or be able to identify which quarterbacks are going to turn out to be the guys and which ones are super talented, fun college players that aren't very good. And the randomness of the colleges that they attended before becoming stars, like Cal for Aaron Rodgers and Texas Tech for Mahomes and Wyoming for Josh Allen, it just doesn't seem there's much of a correlation. How complicated is actually evaluating a quarterback, and why do you think the NFL, like even these people who are spending years breaking this down, get it wrong so often?
Oh, some of the smartest football minds, quarterback minds in the league, they get it wrong all the time. And I think first and foremost, it's because the quarterback position, to play it in the NFL, it's an intangible position. It's about mindset. It's about confidence. And it's one thing to do it in college. It's just a totally another thing to go into a locker room with 30-year-old guys and everyone's looking at you to be the guy. And I mean, Zach Wilson, a good example of that. The confidence isn't there for him to, the talent, the physical talent is there, but not the confidence. Where Brock Purdy doesn't have the same type of physical skills with his arm and the size. But in terms of just the makeup, the mental makeup, that is something that's hard to really contextualize or have a data point at a combine in terms of their confidence and just the way they're wired. That's what it's all about, and that's why the interview process is so important for these quarterbacks. But a lot of teams don't know the right questions to ask, and it's not like there is a clear-cut way to get to the bottom of each one of these guys to understand who they are. But because you look at first-round quarterbacks the last 10 years, it's a below 50-50 hit rate. So, if you're a team, you have to take a swing, but at the same time, you have to really understand what makes these guys tick. The scouting slogan is always going to be traits over production. So guys that maybe didn't have the eye-popping stats aren't going to be necessarily the first quarterback drafted, because teams are going to try to isolate these guys and figure out, okay, what are the individual traits that make them very talented, what's going to translate, and focus on that. And, Caleb and Drake May and Jane Daniels, who we expect to be the first three quarterbacks drafted, so much of this process depends on where you end up. I'm fascinated by, in a couple of years ago, if Mitchell Trubisky went to the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes went to the Bears, you just swap those two. What's the trajectory of both of their careers? Coaching and development matters. That is a big part of this process that we don't talk about enough. Now, Patrick Mahomes is special enough that he's probably still, a special player in the NFL, regardless of where he goes. But, who knows what Mitchell Trubisky would be with Andy Reid and, just the infrastructure they have there in Kansas City. We don't know. And so that's a big part of this whole conversation, is where these guys end up.
I think Tim Couch would have been an All-Pro. I'm gonna die on that hill.
I don't disagree. I don't. Yeah, he went behind the worst offensive line and one of the worst offensive lines in NFL history. With his top receiver was Kevin Johnson in '99 with the Browns. So it's an interesting game of what if with some of these quarterbacks who unfortunately just went to bad spots.
I think Michael Penix is a really interesting prospect for a lot of reasons. There seems to be this idea after the Sugar Bowl that this guy's the best player we've ever seen. It's okay, he's extremely accurate. The anticipation's there, but if you're looking for things he is older, the knees are an issue. He hasn't really done a ton when Kalen DeBoer was not on the headset with him, but a lot of those things do translate. He seems like a guy that might be there. When you draft a quarterback, it seems like we want this guy to be our guy for 10, 15 years if we can. He's probably not that guy. What do you make of his future, and what do you see as sort of how the NFL views a guy that's going to be, I think, a complicated assessment?
Definitely complicated. He's a polarizing prospect. There's no way around that. He won't be for everybody. And I think that he certainly benefited from the situation in Washington. And this is where you, as an evaluator, you have to separate reasons and excuses. Was he the reason for that offense being, what it was? Or are we making excuses, because he had the receivers? He throwing the 3 pro receivers, and the offensive line won the Joe Moore Award as the top offensive line in college football this year. The coaching in place was certainly a benefit to him. But I think the 2 playoff games was an interesting juxtaposition of 2 defenses that we saw against Texas, very vanilla. They knew exactly what Texas was going to try and do, and he was able to exploit that. Now against Michigan, which is the closest thing to an NFL defense that he has ever seen, he struggled. And before he even got the snap, it seemed like he was thinking about that impending pressure that was coming for him. So just the inconsistent areas of his game, some of the mechanical stuff, anticipation over the middle of the field is a real issue for him. His pressure reaction is very up and down. Those type of things you worry about in his transition to the pro game, but you love the arm confidence. You love his aggressiveness and willingness to attack every square inch of the field. It could be a winning formula in the right situation, but he's just not going to be for everybody. And he could be drafted 30th. He could be drafted 80th. And I don't think either spot would really be that surprising.
People know me as kind of a high school recruiting head here. And I'm just fascinated by this Brock Purdy thing on how a player who is going to be playing in the Super Bowl might not have ever even gotten a chance to even play in the NFL had the quarterback they actually took in Trey Lance getting injured. Like, I just am fascinated by the smartest man offensively that people perceive anyway in offensive football, not even discovering what Brock Purdy was unless he was put into a situation where he had to play him. Maybe that's lack of reps or whatever. But, what did people miss with Brock Purdy is just probably an impossible question to answer. But, we saw his tape in college, and he had his moments, but he wasn't particularly great consistently in college either, which brings me to this long-winded end of the question, Dane, which is, what can we take from the NFL draft, if anything, in the process of breaking down prospects and apply it to the high school ranks, if possible? Like, how do you evaluate, and I'm not sure if you even do this, but what would you take from your process and try to figure out what a better hit rate would be from high school athletes and in the recruiting world?
I mean, there's definitely some parallels between the two, right? Where, you're banking on traits, you're banking on height, weight, speed. The guys in high school that are bigger and faster than everyone usually have more stars. And that in the draft, that's how it plays out. Guys go in the first round because they have high-end traits, projectable traits, and translatable traits. So there's definitely correlation there. But I go back to what I said earlier about the mental makeup. I mean, that's the biggest thing, and it's not an easy thing to figure out. I mean, Kyle Shanahan drafted Trey Lance 3rd overall, a guy that hasn't been able to get onto an NFL field, and when he has, it hasn't been hasn't looked pretty. But Brock Purdy, I mean, I don't want to take anything. I'm not gonna ding Kyle Shanahan for Kyle Purdy because he drafted him, but he drafted him the final pick in the draft. If you really liked him, he would have drafted him in the 2nd round or 3rd round instead of waiting until the final pick. So sometimes you have to get lucky that way, but I think it does come down to just the mental makeup. That is a big part of this. Football is a game of adversity, and it's not for everybody. And that mental and physical toughness is something that weeds guys out. And for a guy like Brock Purdy, especially at the quarterback position, he has that to him where he bounces back. Emotionally resilient. That's why Jalen Hurts, I think, is another good example of that, where easy to poke holes in his game when you watched his college tape. But then you get to know him and you understand just the way he's wired, and you're like, all right, I think he's going to continue to get better, but I know just the leadership that he brings, the competitiveness. This is a guy that we feel really good bringing into our building, and regardless of what happens. So, it is a hard thing to figure out, but it's something. If you're an NFL general manager, if you're an NFL front office, that has to be the goal: is to figure out who fits your culture and who understands the way things work with that toughness.
And yet somehow impossible to figure out before they're good. It's easy to say that now, but how do you figure it out first? I guess is the $1 million question. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah.
Dane, college football is in a weird space with roster construction, roster management. We're still trying to get our hands around what the extra year of COVID eligibility means. Obviously, with transfers, that changes everything about how you operate in college. But in general, NFL roster construction is still relatively the same. Collective bargaining has that effect, Dane. We're working on that down here. But in general, when you look at all of the chaos with the roster construction in college and the additional year changing that, how do you think that has affected assessments and trying to figure out who is this guy? And do you feel like that has affected knowing more or less, or what is that changed about the process of evaluating guys as they come into the league?
Oh, I mean, we could talk for hours, right, about just the changing landscape of college football and all the ripple effects of it has on the NFL draft and how scouts do their job. Thankfully that COVID year is almost up. So just understanding how many years these guys have left and, who's going to the draft, who's not, that will change here coming up. And I was talking with a scout down at the Senior Bowl about this, how the quote unquote, the small school prospect is kind of being eradicated. Maybe that's too strong of a word choice, but because of the transfer portal and NIL and the extra COVID year, a lot of these FCS or Division II players, they're getting a chance to make that jump before they get to the NFL. Look at the Senior Bowl roster this year. Only a handful of non-FBS guys. And so there's always going to be small school guys. Maybe they're just loyal to the program. I know, Tucker Kraft, the tight end from South Dakota State last year, he turned down 6 figures from SEC schools. Alabama wanted him. He stayed put, won an FCS title, still a day 2 pick. Worked out just fine for him. And it's not like this is a bad thing. I don't blame players for transferring up and getting more on the radar with NFL teams and getting a chance to play at the highest level. But we're going to see fewer and fewer small school prospects get drafted because of just they're going to have more options before they get to the draft process. And then, with NIL, Ohio State's the perfect example for this, right? How guys that might be on the fence about going pro or possibly going back, they're going to be lured back because of these NIL deals. And again, not necessarily a bad thing. If I'm JT Tuimalu, I wasn't a lock first-round pick, but I expect to be drafted probably somewhere in the top 40. Both Olufashinu, Joe Alt, probably the 2 tackles that are going to be drafted first this year, they said I was the guy that was the toughest challenge for them this year. But there are certain things that I can work on to get better, make myself a first-round type of player, a lock first-round type of player. So I can go back, make quality money, and get better and improve my draft positioning. That definitely changes things. Ohio State, they had, 6 guys, I believe, who were expected to be top 100 picks go back. Tuimalu, Denzel Burke, Travion Henderson, Egbuka, Tyleik Williams, and then Jack Sawyer. And then I would even throw in Jordan Hancock, the corner, and Donovan Jackson, the guard, who were borderline guys, could have easily gone top 100. So that's 8 right there who, it's crazy that they're able to retain that type of talent. But again, it's the ripple effect of NIL and how this affects the draft. It's interesting because it does dilute the talent in the draft pool a little bit. So guys with 4th or 5th round grades are now going to go in the 3rd round because teams are just running out of those day two grades. And I mapped out my top 100. It's coming out next week. And I always send it around to a few of my buddies in the league to get their opinions on it. And one of them mentioned how, you got this guy at 75. I've got a 5th round grade on him. And he's like, but you know what? When you stack all these players, it kind of makes sense where you have him. And he was mentioning how, he hopes his boss realizes this. So when he has a 5th round grade on a guy who goes in the mid-3rd, he doesn't look bad because of that. It's that type of draft class with the lack of talent or lack of depth on day 3. So the ripple effects of this and the college football evolution is really interesting.
Sorry, guys. I just got back from the cage. Just put in a future for Ohio State to win the national title this year after what he just said.
Hey, Will
top
Howard,
100
what do you
picks.
got?
Yeah,
What do you got,
yeah.
Will Howard? I mean,
We'll
that's
see.
really what it comes down to. Yeah.
The thing that I'm also interested in too, and maybe this is more general, but I think it's kind of, you hit on a lot of points there, Dane, is this notion of traits over production.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, as a NFL draft analyst yourself here, what do you think about that notion? Like, when does production actually start to matter? And I've heard former NFL quarterbacks say this to me, after the fact, but years starting and games started is a huge statistic that seems to be overlooked in the NFL draft process. Do you agree with that notion, or does production have to matter more than it seems to matter right now?
Well, I mean, there's no substitution for experience. And so the more starts you have on your resume, that absolutely matters. I mean, that's something where, like in the draft guide, in the Beast, you want to know the game started for every single player, it's in there. Because I do think that plays a factor. It's not. I absolutely believe in traits over production. I think that is the right way to go. But that's not the same as saying production doesn't matter. I do care about production and what did you do for your team? What type of impact did you make? But you know what? College football and NFL, they're almost two different sports. They really are. And so I think that, while I do care about production and what you did, catching the ball, or how many tackles you have, what your backfield production was, all that does matter. But I care more about your translatable traits and just the way you win, your football, not just the athletic traits, but the football traits, your technique, your instincts, the way you see the field, the way you see the game. So it is something that is. We could really talk longer and longer about it, but at the end of the day, traits over production is the right thing or is the right way to go. But that's not the same thing as saying that production doesn't matter.
Dave, you got anything else?
Well, I guess real quick, Dane, before we let you go, college football is expanding into a playoff. You look at the NCAA tournament, Tyrus Thomas, Patrick O'Brien. I can think of many guys who blow up in the tournament and then blow up their team's draft because people overvalued the tournament. Do you suspect college football will have a similar effect where maybe it's a guy that people didn't necessarily have an eye on? He has 2 great games and he goes from day 3 pick to day 1 pick, and then maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. What do you think the new playoff will have an impact on the draft?
That's certainly what matters, because body of work matters over everything, but we're all human, right? I mean, when the lights are the brightest and we see guys perform on the big stage, subconsciously or consciously, I mean, that plays a factor. And so it would have been really interesting if Washington lost that semifinal playoff game. Michael Penix playing the game of his life, best game he's ever played. And if they lost, and that was the last game he ever played, how are we viewing Michael Penix compared to after seeing him against Michigan? It's a really interesting thing there, because after that semifinal game, I was like, I don't know what to do with Michael Penix, because I gave him a 3rd-round grade. All the feedback I'm getting from NFL teams is 3rd-round grade, but he just looked like a top 20 pick with the way he played against Texas. And then, goes up against Michigan, and it's like, all right, that's the player that I figured we would get. That's what I think more of his tape showed. So, but I think to your point, with more games in the playoff, more games that matter in terms of the tournament, that's something that will play a factor. Whether it should or not, that's the different question. But I think it will, because we're all human, and when the lights are the brightest and guys perform, there's certain value in that. There's no doubt.
I'm just going to work on a column now that says why Michael Penix should be selfish and should have tossed or thrown the CFP semifinal. Dane, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dane. I'll call you tomorrow and ask about the Beast.
Yeah.
I expect a daily text. Yeah.
He's the best, if not one of the best in the business. Thanks so much for your time and super insightful stuff.
Appreciate
Anytime,
you, Dane.
guys.
And everybody, if you're wanting more of Dane Brugler, and I don't blame you if you do, we encourage you to go listen to Dane on Prospects to Pros and the Athletic College. I always do that, Dave. I always say the Athletic College Football Show instead of the Athletic Show. We encourage you to go find the Athletic Football Show feed. It's our NFL feed at the Athletic. It's one of the best NFL listens out there. He and Nate Tice provide excellent analysis. You can also read his written work on the Athletic, including his latest mock drafts and Senior Bowl takeaways. And then, of course, don't miss the Beast, which is a encyclopedia of draft knowledge and thorough breakdowns of your favorite players and maybe some of the players that your favorite NFL team are considering drafting. So how about we move on to the next segment here? Let's get back a little bit more into college football. The SEC and the Big Ten advisory group and the impact that this could have. There's a joint committee potentially that will be comprised of presidents, athletic directors, and chancellors that will be a working group to address the significant changes that are happening in our sport. And people think that this is the first domino to fall before the SEC and the Big Ten leave the NCAA and start their own entity. What is your take on the news from late last week? And, what should people be feeling about this?
Yeah, so I had a sort of muddled Star Wars analogy that I think you would have really appreciated.
I also don't get because I don't watch those movies.
Ari's too good to embrace intergalactic conflict.
At the end of the show, Dave, do you watch True Detective?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, this latest season is like turning out to be supernaturally, and I hate it, and I'm in a debate with my friends about it.
Okay.
But we can talk about it at the end of the show. Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, but ultimately, I think I was telling somebody about this the other day. So I was at the coaches convention recently, and there was a lot of discussion in the assistant coaches, among the assistant coaches, among the head coaches, that the Big Ten was conspicuously absent. The SEC. Now the meetings were in Nashville. Ari, how many SEC coaches do you think showed up to the head coaches meeting?
One.
You are correct. Do you have any guesses of who that was?
I think you told me this.
I'll give you a hint. Cheating. He lives there.
Oh, yeah. Clark Lee.
Yes. So there's an idea, even among the people who are coaching in the ACC and in the Big 12, and there were a couple Big 10 coaches there, I should say. But there's an idea that whatever that they discuss in these meetings is like, it doesn't even matter. We're going to get told eventually what we're doing because the SEC and the Big 10 have the biggest bat and they're going to swing it eventually. And this is sort of what this is. When we talk about what are the new rules going to look like, and if there is a break off, if there is a new division, if there is a new governance structure, well, the SEC and the Big Ten are probably going to be the two chief parties that are deciding what these rules look like. And the ACC and the Big 12 are probably going to have to live with it. And a lot of those rules are probably going to put those leagues at a disadvantage, but money talks, and that's where it is. And so, yeah, for now, this doesn't mean anything, but it's clearly a signal. And I think, we mentioned this last week. I think the Big Ten and Tony Petitti specifically recognize that, hey, it behooves us to have a productive working relationship with the SEC. For a long time, there was not a lot of discussion between Greg Sankey and Kevin Warren and Greg Sankey and Jim Delaney. There was not a lot of open lines of communication. There seems to be now. And I think that as you sort of go into this uncertain future where everyone agrees the current state is not sustainable, it's better to have these debates among each other in sort of off-site meetings so that when you go to the meetings that decide, hey, this is what we're trying to talk about, what we're trying to do, that the two biggest leagues have a united front. And I think that's where you're trying to get to with this advisory group, which is not called a committee, and it's not called the Alliance 2.0, but it probably
Don't you kind of wish it did, though, if it was called
the
Alliance?
I absolutely do. I think it would have been hilarious to call it the Alliance, but
because this actually makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think this is a real thing, unlike the Alliance, which is sort of just like a thing with no contract that sort of was like aimed at thumbing their nose at the SEC for stealing Texas and Oklahoma, despite the fact that Texas and Oklahoma called them first. And then the Big Ten, before too long, broke that alliance, whatever we want to call it. I feel like Jim and Dwight had a stronger alliance than the Big Ten and the ACC and the Pac-12.
I have some statements here that I'd like to read from Tony Petitti first. Let's start there. The Big Ten and the SEC have substantial investment in the NCAA, and there is no question that the voices of our two conferences are integral to governance and other reform efforts, Petitti said. We recognize the similarities in our circumstances as well as the urgency to address the common challenges that we face. And here's Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner. There are similar cultural and social impacts on our student athletes, our institutions, and our communities because of the new collegiate athletics environment. We do not have predetermined answers to the myriad of questions facing us. We do not expect to agree on everything, but enhancing interaction between our conferences will help us focus our efforts on common sense solutions.
Can I translate that real quickly, Ari?
Yeah, go ahead.
You know that the Chappelle Show clip of the lady fanning herself with the money and saying, "I'm sorry, there's broke people in here." That's what I see. We recognize the similarity in our circumstances, aka we rolling in it. Y'all about to be some broke boys.
I think that the most pertinent thing that people are probably turning to, Dave, as a result of this news isn't so much maybe just like the end of days of college football as we know it, but how much this is going to impact the college football playoff because of the SEC and the Big Ten's, continued growing influence into the future. Greg Sankey told Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports that we have the reality of needing to deal with CFP governance with the 2026 season and beyond. That's a highly important issue. I think that basically speaking, this is there's no certainty about who and what is going to be, at play here in 2026 and beyond. How does this impact the future of the college football playoff and college football as we know it?
Yeah, I mean, so right now the key debate, I call it a debate. So when this 12-team playoff was first, brought in, it made a lot of sense. We have 6 auto bids and 6 at-larges. The SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 all had an auto bid. And then the highest-ranked G5 champion also got a bid. So that could be a number of teams from the lower-level leagues. Well, now the college football structure obviously is changing, most notably the Pac-12 dissolving. And so
they should still get an auto bid.
Well, for now, we'll see. Yeah. So you have the Pac-2 plus the Mountain West. It's sort of like a Gladys Knight and the Pips situation with Washington State and Oregon State. And so, there's certainly some feeling from the Pac-12, Pac-2 country, I should say. Well, we'd like to hold on to this auto bid. Well, respectfully, fellas, the Mountain West plus Oregon State and Washington State, that is not a power league. But contractually, you still have that sort of. So sorting that out and agreeing with it, I think it's very clear that we're going to go to a 5-7 situation where the ACC and its weird, amalgamation of teams that don't really make a lot of sense. Shout out to SMU and Cal and Stanford will have their bid. The Big 12 in their weird, that's still a power conference, despite the fact that it's clearly a level below without a true power in the sport in the league. It's going to be a competitive league, and they definitely deserve a bid. And then, of course, the Big 12, the Big 10 and the AC and the SEC will also have auto bids. They're going to get a bunch of at-large teams in as well. And then the G5 is there. Now, the Pac-12, Pac-2 now is sort of caught in the middle of, are they G5? Are they Power 5? Whatever we want to call these weird leagues is the SEC and the Big Ten.
How far away are we from it just being the have and the have-nots? Like, we know it. You don't have to have a name for it. We don't know what the name is going to be.
Yeah, we're in a weird spot. We're still in transition.
You have 2 power team conferences, and you have like a power conference light in the ACC, and then everybody else is kind of in there below. And I just wonder. I know the auto bid thing is kind of funny, but it's like Washington State and Oregon State are also kind of interestingly situated in the sense that if they win the Mountain West, they're still going to be in a pretty good position to potentially claim that spot. It might not be an auto bid, but it's not like it's impossible for them to still be in the dance.
I will say, Ari, the Big 12, I think on average has better teams. They just don't have the Clemson, the Florida State, the Miamis
I'm with you.
that can go there. But I think, you look at the bottom.
But beating those
leagues,
teams during the regular season, Dave, has been meant so much to those other programs.
I agree.
Like in the year that TCU made the college football playoff, beating Texas was like a legitimizing stamp on their resume of like, hey, we beat these teams. Yeah. Not only did we win our conference, but we beat the powers in that conference. So when you remove them, anytime you go undefeated through a conference that doesn't possess those types of teams, you're always going to have a certain segment of the population raise their eyebrows and say, well, you haven't really played anybody good.
And I always found it annoying. Challenge. I always found it annoying that when Texas and Oklahoma didn't have great years, everybody was like, well, the Big 12's down. It's like, that Oklahoma State team in 2011 was pretty freaking good.
That's your favorite team of all time.
It's a great team, Ari. The 2015 Baylor and TCU teams, those are really good teams that would have been competitive in the playoff. And so, there haven't been a ton of teams outside of that, that have been like elite teams that weren't Texas and Oklahoma. But there's just been, if Texas and Oklahoma are not in the top 10 or top 5, people just have always cast the Big 12 and say, oh, the Big 12 is down this year. So they don't have to deal with that anymore, at least. And if you're sitting there in the Big 12 and you're a 12-1 champion that beat the crap out of 8 of the teams you played, I think people will still look at you with some respect, not in the same way that a SEC team might have or a Big Ten team might have, but I think
He'll be looked at the same way, in my opinion, as really, really good G5 teams in the past.
No, it'll be no. It'll be different. I mean, Ari, the amount of disrespect
I'm not
that Cincinnati
saying no.
or like some of these other teams.
Let me jump back in. I don't mean in the sense that that they're some sort of second-class citizen. I mean, people will look at them as they are untested, but certainly an entertaining storyline, the same way they viewed Cincinnati when they actually made it, of this is a really, really good football team, Power 5, G5 or not.
I don't know. I think a lot of people just anytime a G5 team is in the mix are just this is a joke. These guys shouldn't be in there. There's still a pretty loud sect of college football fans who believe that for whoever it is, whether we're talking about Western Michigan or Cincinnati or UCF, back in the day, or whoever. I still think there's a pretty loud sect of college football fans that anytime that there's a call for this G5 team deserves playoff consideration, they're just reflexively saying no.
But now we have a system that reflects their inclusion. So I think that automatically shifts because they're not taking a spot from someone else.
Yeah, they're getting it. You're going to get in. You're going to get a chance to prove
that.
Period.
But I didn't mean it in the sense of how I think that the way I would put it would be interesting story and intriguing team to watch, though I'm unsure of them type of a mentality. If a team like TCU or a team like Oklahoma State runs the table in 2027, they're not going to be viewed as in the same vein as they would have had they gone undefeated 2 years ago. That's just a fact.
So it's worth noting, though, Ari, as we kind of move, to go from the 6-6 plan to the 5-7 plan, you have to be unanimous. Well,
right.
Well, the Pac-2 is not going to vote for that. So I don't know where you go from there. You're sort of at an impasse. Our colleague Chris Vanini is at the CFP meetings today. I don't think they will settle that issue today, but they'll have to settle it relatively soon. I don't think we have a Pac-2 schedule yet for 2024. Am I correct in that?
I think you're right. Yeah, I haven't seen it.
So there's just,
but we kind of know what it's going to look like.
Well, kind of. We have a decent idea, but we're not sure. So it's going to be interesting.
Dave, can we go to a listener question? I'm going to read it.
Maybe
we got a text.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that the people who are submitting texts feel seen. What would it take realistically and legally for college institutions to part ways with the NCAA, specifically for college football? And would Greg Sankey be the obvious Roger Goodell commissioner for college football in the future?
So I'll tackle the second question first. College football needs some kind of central leadership. I've said this for years. We're in the situation that we're in now in a million different ways because of that. But I think it was in Vegas last year, I did ask Greg Sankey specifically, how would you feel about, having a czar of college football? And not him, but he did say, well, if you look through history, it doesn't usually end well for czars, which is sort of a funny way of dodging the question. But I think it holds true, but then figuring out a new governance strategy where there is a commissioner is difficult. Now, if we ever get to that point, I think that Greg Sankey has the respect and approval rating among college football administrators to be the favorite, to be that guy if we get to that point. But then, there's certainly a question of, well, there's two leagues that are going to be running this. And if you're a Big Ten, administrator or person, even though you might respect Greg Sankey, you're still installing an SEC commissioner to run this thing. So, if that does get to that point, I think there'd be some trepidation on that point. So we'll put a pin in that because it's sort of a smaller issue. As for the larger issue, I think the short answer is we don't really know exactly what that would look like. I think that this new division that Charlie Baker is throwing out there is a decent starting point. But in terms of a real break-off, everybody's got to agree and putting together rules and getting 60, whatever the number is going to be, institutions to say, we want to form our own thing. All right, it's very hard to get 60 people to agree on anything, much less 60 large institutions that have varying levels of,
I mean, hell, half of our staff picked TCU to beat Georgia 2 years ago in the national title.
You're never going to let that go, are you? You're never going to let that go.
Yeah, but you're right. It's just I think the answer to that question is, think about how complicated all the issues are that college football faces that should be tackleable or easy. And then think about how complicated and complex that would be. and then try to get everybody on the same page for that. And then all of a sudden it's just like, holy crap, I can't even envision what that would look like.
Yeah. So I think we're still a long way from that. I think ultimately the goal for a lot of people is not so much to get to this predetermined finish line. I think when you talk to people around the sport, it's just like, let's get to a place as soon as possible that players, coaches, administration, university leadership can all agree, okay, this is at least more sustainable. It's not going to be perfect. They're going to have to tweak some things, change some things. There'll be unforeseen circumstances. But right now, it's not good for players. It's really not good for coaches. It's not great for administrators who can't sneeze without getting sued. And so this is not sustainable for anybody. And so college sports and college football, which I think might be two very different things very soon, have to sort of trend toward a space that is a little bit more sustainable for everyone. And I would like the idea of, if you have a college football break-off, redistrict the conferences to make more sense. I'm fine with college football realigning with these conferences. Like if Stanford and Cal and SMU or whatever want to play football in the ACC, that's fine. But like that, chasing the dollar and the TV money should not affect your like non-revenue sports, or like water polo's got to go play, at Maryland on a Tuesday night or whatever. That doesn't need to be happening. Like keep the smaller sports regional, baseball, swimming, all that stuff. I think if college football breaks off, you can sort of redraw things back up and say, okay, can we get back to a more common sense place for the rest of college sports, because college football has been chasing this money and has messed everything
up. It also would be financially advantageous for everybody too.
Well,
so
maybe.
What I'm just saying, like the expenses of flying across the country, if you are Stanford's water polo team, it's a lot cheaper to go play in Oregon than it is in Maryland. It's not.
It's substantial, but compared to what we're talking about, it's still a drop in the bucket comparatively.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's only like 12 people. How many people are on a water polo roster? That's a trivia question.
Roster.
I want the answer next week. You have to go into that, okay? All right, I think this is a nice segue into the actual mailbag portion of the podcast. We have some voicemails. Want to say in advance that we appreciate everybody who participates. If you'd like your voicemails to be read or played on the show in the future, here's another reminder to call 316-462-9852. We listen to them, we laugh at them, we love them, and we want to play them on the show. So if you want yours on, again, 316-462-9852. Cam, why don't you play the first one?
Ari, U.S. gets to call in and call you dumb, and I am happy to oblige you today. I have never seen anyone more unaware of who their audience is, college football fans. We are not built on logic. We are built on lunacy. And you're telling me, an Ohio State fan, not to spend all offseason trashing Michigan for cheating, but instead focus on winning the game next year. Beat it with that stuff, nerd. I don't play on the team, and I'm not on the staff. What do you want me to do? Go ahead and draw up some plays and send them to Coach Day to use next November? Hell no. I'm going to do the only thing I can do, which is hop on Twitter, hop on these message boards, and call these boys cheaters, cheaters, cheaters. And they'll respond back, championship, championship, championship. And I'll respond back, cheaters, cheaters, cheaters. And we're going to go back and forth until next November, because the rivalry, it's 24/7, 365, baby. And it ain't built on logic. It's built on being a hater.
My favorite and least favorite thing about that.
Yeah, he's right.
My favorite thing and least favorite thing about that is that he definitely wrote that down.
He was smooth. It
was good, but not smooth enough. He read. It was good. It was a good reading, but it was clearly a reading.
He's smoother on his question than I am on the show. I'll give him credit for that. I do like the frantic phone calls that we've gotten from the stadiums. Like people calling as they're walking out is the best. But pure raw emotion. I'm a broken man. Help me, please. But I think that's right. I think that it wasn't so much not to engage in the rivalry as much as don't sound so weak doing it. You know what I mean? Like it's just, I don't know. It just, I feel like Michigan cheated is the same thing. If you're the Ohio State fan and you're listening to this, or any Ohio State fan listening to this, every time Ohio State gets a commitment, programs that didn't recruit or have the NIL in place or whatever that were good enough to get that commitment, writing on the comments of the stories, they paid him. I think it's the same thing of okay, loser, go complain and cry in the corner. That's kind of how it comes across to me. But if you want to antagonize your counterparts in this rivalry, all the power to you. I have no notes for your call. I want you as a fan to internalize and, use the entertainment product of the sport the way that you like it. Like, I do think that sometimes when I write a column, you got to remember that it's my opinion. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change yours or that you have to behave the way that I probably would if I were in that scenario.
Mhm.
If I were in that scenario, I would still hate Michigan and resent everything that they did this year. But at the same time, I wouldn't be crying because, the fact of the matter is that they like it. They want you to do that. They want you to, show that you're upset and to, manifest that emotion the way that you are. And I would probably just try to do it in a stronger manner. That's all. That's just my opinion. If you think I'm crazy, then I appreciate the call and it made me smile.
Mhm.
Next one.
Yeah.
Hey, Ari and David. My name is Darren. I live in Louisiana. I love the show. Been listening to the Athletics college football content for a few years now. I have a take. I've been thinking about it for a couple months now. The Dr. Pepper Fansville athlete is the new Madden curse. Now, with the Madden curse, more often than not, there was an injury that would occur to the NFL player who was on the cover of the game. So I think this curse is actually more of a team curse. 2021, DJ Uyunglele was crowned as the first Fansville NIL athlete, and Clemson did not have the season that they were hoping for, as Ari predicted going into that season. 2022, Bryce Young was chosen. Most people thought going into that season that Alabama was just going to coast to a natty, and they did not look like a championship team, particularly in their biggest games. 2023, Caleb Williams is next in line, and USC goes 7-5, which is still mind-boggling to me. Hoping an LSU player never accepts this NIL opportunity, as it seems to be the death knell for expected team success that season. Again, love the show, guys. Hope the offseason flies by. Take care.
Got to get Peyton Hillis on the cover of that.
It's a good theory. I will say I think Bryce Young had maybe a better year than he did even when he won the Heisman. His numbers
it's a
weren't
team
there.
curse.
I know, but that's the one hole. But it's a good theory. It's a good theory.
You know what? I actually have a theory in response to this theory. You want to hear it? And I think part of the reason why I would bend down at the altar of Nick Saban for the rest of eternity is there is a certain mindset. And I don't know if this is something that was shaped when I covered the 14 and 15 Ohio State teams that won the national title in 14 and then, basically flopped the next year. They only lost once, but they didn't make the playoff despite being more talented and having everybody back from the year. I think that there is a certain emotional let up that happens when you achieve greatness once.
Mhm.
And people in this position have already achieved greatness. And then when they come into the following year, I know it's a team curse. The pedal to the metal might not be there. And the reason why I love Nick Saban is that for somehow, some way, over the course of his, 15 years or whatever it was at Alabama, he somehow continued to get the best out of Alabama year after year, despite the fact that they had been the reigning champions a lot of those years. And maybe that is just kind of a way to explain the unexplainable, or maybe it's just a true detective theory. I don't know, but
Maybe.
I did find it funny and certainly something to track when we see who it is next year.
Ari, how would you feel about Nick Saban on the cover of NCAA 24?
I think that's who it should be, if we're being honest.
Okay, I'm with it. I'd prefer that over like Caleb or Jaden Daniels or whoever. I'd prefer.
I don't know how they're going to pick the athlete, but I mean, who better personifies the sport and the return of the game?
Yeah.
Or how do you even honor, the run that Saban had in a better way?
And I actually would not. I would not feel that way if he was still active. But I think the fact
the fact that he's not active anymore, it kind of reminds me of the Madden cover that had Madden on it.
Yeah.
And he passed away. So it's a little bit of a different scenario, but it's still, honoring one of the best, most dominant fixtures in the history of the sport, the year that he retires and the year the game comes back out, I think would be appropriate. So, okay, next one. This one is a text, I think, so let me read it. Future of the Power Four. Matthew T. Posted this question on The Athletic, and it's just a reminder, if you do subscribe to The Athletic, please leave questions. We read them, and we will use them. If you could start from scratch, what would your proposal for the future of the P2, 4, and 5 look like?
Are we talking about conferences or like rules or like governance?
It's kind of vague, so just take it the way that you want to take it.
Well, I actually wrote about this last summer. I think that smaller is better. I would like 8 team leagues, and you'd play a 7-team conference schedule, and then you'd play 5 non-conference games against whoever and compare all that stuff. That's what I would like personally. I think it would be more regional. I think it would be college football what it is. I think if you could draw it up with a central leadership, that would make a lot more sense. If you had a lot of Texas schools together and everybody pooled all the TV money, and it made a little bit more sense where, you didn't have all this sniping and backstabbing, and you get conferences where, Rutgers is in the Big Ten and Cal is in the ACC and Utah is in the Big 12 sharing a conference with UCF. It doesn't really make sense. So that's what I do, but maybe that's just me.
You know what? The one thing that I will say, if it were up to me, and maybe it's kind of just repeating your answer, but I do understand.
Only 8 teams, kill everyone else.
I would only just play Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Florida State, Texas, Oklahoma,
that's a good
kill
plan.
Everybody else. No,
that's a good
plan. No. My thing about college football, and maybe the most pertinent or prime example of the tribalism that it is the SEC's take on the South and football in general, and it just means more and all that stuff. The one thing that I will miss as teams bolt their conferences in pursuit of television riches is the regionality of the sport. And you mentioned this a few times early on the podcast, but I want Midwesterners to feel pride in what Michigan did because they're all a bunch. I want Southerners to feel pride when Alabama or LSU or Georgia wins a national, or somebody else wins a national championship out of that region. I thought that the Big 12 was perfectly situated in terms of the geographical connections between the two powers that were in Texas and Oklahoma and everybody else.
Nebraska.
And there are some, in the last 7 years, departures of that, of like Rutgers and Nebraska, but also too, like the West Coast football. It's like the Pac-12 didn't die. I wonder if the identity of the Western Coast died. You know what I mean? Like that to me is a really sad story. So I don't know what the playoff would look like. But if it were up to me, I would probably echo your sentiment in the smaller conferences, 8 and 8. And I'd want those 8 teams to be sorted based on regionality, not based on prowess. Yeah. And then I would want the playoff to reflect that, and maybe even put it into a position where it'd be like 8 auto bids and 4 for everybody else in terms of like a committee standpoint, and then let it play out that way, and then get the tribalism and the locality of that sport back. That's the one thing I'm going to miss more than anything. And I understand that money and NIL and transfers and all that stuff that we're kind of, living through right now is an inevitability. But the one thing that I think that we could keep intact, and I still think it's possible if we ever got to that, maybe not anymore, with the super conferences, is just, competing with the people that you live near, and then rooting for, in some cases, the people that you live near, to show that your area of the country is the elite of the sport. I thought that was great. So, okay, I think that's the end of the show here, Dave. Welcome back, man.
Appreciate it. It's been fun.
Good to be back, and I hope you had a nice vacation. This show is going to keep going on. Later in the week, you will have another episode on the Until Saturday feed with Nicole Auerbach. Thank you guys so much for listening to the latest edition of Until Saturday. Lastly, just wanted to say before we get out of here that there is a rumor that Bill O'Brien, not a rumor, reports that Bill O'Brien could be leaving his Ohio State offensive coordinator job before ever calling a play to become the head coach at Boston College. We will certainly be on top of that as that continues to progress, but wanted to make sure we have it in there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the Apple channel, interact with those channels any way that you can. The links to both are found in the show's description. And finally, call 316-462-9852 to leave a voicemail or to submit a question for future mailbag episodes. For Dave Ubben, I'm Ari Wasserman. Thanks again for listening to the latest edition of Until Saturday.
And bring back the turnover.